first day with a big story in Parliament. President Cyril Ramaphosa having survived a concerted effort to trigger his removal from office. Yesterday, members of Parliament debated that Section 89 independent panel report looking into a robbery at his Limpopo farm back in 2020. And that report found that he may have violated the Constitution. Just over 200 MPs voted against the adoption of the report. 148 others, I beg your pardon, must have been 248 others that voted in favour of it. Many MPs who opted to not have the report adopted cited Cyril Ramaphosa's challenge of it in the Constitutional Court. So what does this moment teach us about this concept of the separation of powers? Let's make sense of it for you now. Bring in Judge Johann Kreigler, who's a former Constitutional Court Justice, joining us via our video link this morning. And it's great to have you on the program, sir, so early on a Wednesday. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. You know, often the judiciary, when it has to adjudicate matters that have to do with politics or Parliament, will be very careful that whatever outcomes they come up with is not criticized in such a way that they're accused of overreach, essentially breaching this idea of the separation of powers. I wonder to what extent you reckon the lines have somewhat been blurred around this Pala issue.
Good morning to you and good morning to the viewers. It's an eternal question whenever there is a really difficult issue of separation of powers. Some viewers, many politicians, certainly some senior politicians, seem to think that there is an overreach. Sometimes they may well be right. There is always tension within the separation of powers doctrine. The judiciary is always a watchful yet cooperative member of the overall power of state. Sometimes it's exercise of its oversight power, and that power is only to check whether everything that is done is constitutional. Sometimes its exercise of that supervision power gets very, very close to overreach. Whether it is so at the present stage is a matter for interesting debate.
Your response is reminding me of lessons I received when I was attending Sunday school around the Holy Trinity, this idea of one God and three persons, all being equal but actually quite separate. So I understand the tension you speak of. But, you know, in this particular case, I mean, you know, for instance, some of the MPs in Parliament yesterday who opted not to vote for this report being adopted spoke of the President challenging the report in the Constitutional Court and how it is wiser for us to wait for the outcome of that before proceeding. On the other side of the coin, of course, are people who are worried that if that is accepted, then in one way or the other, the judiciary is stopping Parliament from doing its work. How do we make sense of that tension?
Well, there is some truth in all of that. On the one hand, you cannot stop anybody, including the President, from exercising her or his rights in terms of the Constitution. Those rights include going to court when you think there's an exercise of power by the legislature or the executive that goes beyond the power permitted by the Constitution. On the other hand, when a president involves the judiciary in a political debate, and this is undoubtedly a nakedly political debate, the question arises whether the court should at all be involved in that kind of debate. It is not straightforward. We're not dealing with natural science where you add oxygen and nitrogen and together something, a chemical combination is the result. Here you have nuances, and it is not simple. In the present instance, I cannot comment on the correctness of the President's attitude. That is an issue that will be decided by the Constitutional Court. It may decide, on the one hand, as we've said, that this is a legitimate resort to the Constitution. On the other hand, they may decide that this is an invitation for the Constitutional Court to get involved in politics in a manner not contemplated by the Constitution. That's will be the essence of the debate, I am sure.
Sure. I'm going to take my chance and ask you my next question nonetheless, despite what you've just said about not wanting to comment on this. There are people who are concerned that even if the president is dragging the judiciary in this, perhaps he shouldn't have gone straight to the Constitutional Court whilst doing that. Questions around whether this is a matter that actually deals with constitutional issues. The apex court, as the final arbiter, if you like, on issues, ought to be very careful around what it comments on, let alone what it says. Would you agree with those people who are suggesting that the president should just follow the normal judicial channels, as it were, by starting out in the High Court and it landing up in the Supreme Court of Appeal, if it does, before it even lands up being contemplated by the justices in the apex court?
That is one of the questions, the answer to which is quite simple. The president, if he is involved in a constitutional dispute relating to exercise of power by the president, must go to the Constitutional Court. Exercise of power by the president is a matter solely for the Constitutional Court's jurisdiction. Lower courts are not empowered to deal with it.
Right. There's also real concerns, of course, around this just being a proxy war within the ANC itself. I wonder whether the Constitutional Court, if it does decide to entertain this appeal, can remove itself from that proxy war.
Let's step back for a moment. The Constitution that creates the separation of powers and recognizes its necessity does not really directly contemplate the president being a litigant. We have, ever since Mr. Zuma's conduct, been involved in the Constitution having to deal with conduct which is on the fringes of what the Constitution contemplated. If I go back simply to this, the whole concept of a public protector envisages the public protector, having found that someone in the government has misbehaved, has exceeded its power or her power, contemplates that the public protector reports that misdemeanor to the president, and the president can then intervene. It never contemplated the president himself being the person involved in the misconduct. We're here once again in an issue where the president himself is a litigant. The Constitution, as an ultimate, does contemplate that can and must be adjudicated by the Constitutional Court and only by that court.
Fascinating. The Constitutional Court justices have an unenviable job as they try map a way forward around how they respond to this. Thanks for your insights. Really do appreciate it on this Wednesday morning. Judge Johann Kreigler, a former Constitutional Court justice himself, once again appreciate your time on the AM Report.